Imagine a ship so powerful it could bring an entire nation to its knees. For me, the Bismarck was the Death Star. It was a kind of mechanized warfare that hopefully will never exist again.
Deep in the Atlantic, 3 miles down, lies a monster. The Bismarck, a feared warship, rests on an undersea volcano, a tomb for over 2,000 souls.
It was this monstrous piece of steel that held together no matter what the British could throw at it. And when it finally sank, it became a legend.
It's been silent for 80 years. But here's the catch. Recently, hydrophones picked up a pulse, a repeating mechanical signal coming from the wreck. A warship lost for 8 decades is suddenly active. We're going to explore the hunt for the Bismarck, what the deep-sea drones really found on its crushed hull, and the impossible mystery of the signal that should not exist. The impossible broadcast. Deep in the North Atlantic, there is a place on the map that sailors try to avoid. It's not because of storms or rocks, it's because of what lies beneath. 3 miles down, in a lightless, crushing cold abyss, sits a ghost. This is the grave of the battleship Bismarck, one of the most feared weapons ever built. For over 80 years, it has rested in total silence. A steel tomb for over 2,000 men lying on the slope of a dead underwater volcano. But here's the catch. That silence is broken. Just recently, a research vessel, the Odyssey, was mapping this exact patch of ocean. They weren't looking for the Bismarck, they were testing new hypersensitive deep-sea audio equipment. They were listening for whale calls, the sounds of deep-sea vents, or even secret modern submarines. The control room was dark, lit only by the glow of monitors. A sonar operator staring at a green waterfall of data heard it, a sound. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't the groaning of the earth. It was a pulse, a faint but distinct beep, boop, bzzzt. He flagged it. The sound was mechanical. It was artificial. And it was repeating, every 9 minutes like clockwork. The team gathered. They thought it was a new generation submarine, a secret one. They triangulated the signal. The computer processed the location. And that's when the room went cold. The signal wasn't from a new sub. It wasn't from a lost cargo container. The computers all pointed to the exact same coordinates, the location of the Bismarck wreck. The signal wasn't near the Bismarck, it was coming from it. This is, to put it lightly, impossible. Let's talk about why. A warship lost in 1941, pounded by hundreds of shells and torpedoes, which then fell 3 miles. 3 miles through the water. The physics of that fall are mind-bending. The pressure at that depth is over 6,000 pounds per square inch. It's a force that can crush metal, implode compartments, and destroy any complex machinery. And then, there's the power. There are no batteries from 1941 that can last 80 years. Not lead acid, not anything. The salt water alone would have corroded any power source to dust decades ago. The ship is dead. It should be a silent, rusting hulk. Yet the signal is real. It's been verified by a second pass. The Odyssey team, baffled, has leaked the finding. A warship lost for 8 decades is suddenly active. What most people don't realize is that this changes everything. This isn't just a historical mystery anymore, it's an active one. Everyone's obsessed with how the Bismarck was lost. But the new question is, what is it doing now? This single impossible signal has forced everyone to look back, to re-examine the ship's final days, to look at the old drone footage with new eyes. You see, maybe the cameras missed something. Maybe the ship wasn't just a battleship. Was it carrying something else? Something different? This isn't just a ghost story, it's an engineering problem. It's a mystery that defies the laws of physics and chemistry as we know them. So, here's the deal. To even begin to understand the signal, we have to understand the ship. We have to go back to the 9 days of terror when this monster was unleashed on the world and the desperate, brutal hunt to send it to the bottom. Because the clues to this new mystery, this impossible broadcast, might be hidden in its violent end. But the story of its end is just as strange and just as debated as this new beginning. The ship was a beast, but its first victim was unthinkable. The string bag's lucky shot. To understand the panic, you have to get what the Bismarck was. It wasn't just a ship, it was a statement. Commissioned in August 1940, she was, put simply, the most powerful and advanced warship on the planet. Let's talk wow factors. This thing was 823 feet long. That's almost as long as the Titanic, but the Titanic was a luxury liner. The Bismarck was a 50,000-ton floating fortress. Her armor belt, the skin of the ship, was over 12 inches thick. 13 inches of solid, high-tech steel designed to make torpedoes and shells bounce off like pebbles. Her guns were monsters. 8 15-inch cannons in 4 massive turrets. Each gun could hurl a shell the weight of a small car over 20 miles and hit its target. She was basically a city of steel designed for one purpose: total destruction. And in May of 1941, that monster got loose. The mission was called Operation Rheinübung. The plan was simple and brutal. The Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen would slip out into the vast Atlantic and sever the lifeline. They would hunt the convoys bringing food, fuel, and supplies from America to Britain. If they succeeded, Britain would starve. The whole conflict would be over. The British knew this. The entire Royal Navy was on high alert. On May 21st, a spy plane spotted the ships hiding in a fjord in Norway. The hunt was on. The chase began in the foggy, icy waters of the Denmark Strait. The British sent their own best ships to intercept: the brand new battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the pride of the Royal Navy, the legendary battlecruiser HMS Hood. The Hood was a symbol. She was beautiful, fast, and famous. She was the largest warship in the world for 20 years. She was the pride of a nation. But she had a fatal flaw. She was old. She was built during the First World War and her deck armor was thin. It was never designed to stop shells plunging from the sky. On the morning of May 24th, the two forces met. The battle was short and shocking. At 5:55 a.m., the Bismarck opened fire. Just minutes later, at 6:01 a.m., a salvo of its 15-inch shells found their mark. One shell, fired from over 10 miles away, plunged through the Hood's weak deck and found the ammunition magazine. The result was catastrophic. The HMS Hood exploded in a fireball that shot hundreds of feet into the air. The ship, the pride of a nation, broke in two and vanished in less than 3 minutes. Of her crew of 1,418 men, only 3 survived. 3. The world was stunned. The Bismarck had just announced its arrival by removing the most famous warship in the world, and that's putting it lightly. But the Bismarck didn't escape unharmed. A shell from the Prince of Wales had hit a forward fuel tank. It wasn't a major wound, but it was a bleeder. The ship was leaving a trail of oil and its top speed was cut. The German Admiral Günther Lütjens made a fateful choice: run for the safety of a port in occupied France. Now the hunt became a chase. The British Prime Minister Winston Churchill issued a simple, chilling order: sink the Bismarck. Every ship, plane, and resource the British had was thrown into the pursuit. This wasn't just a battle anymore, it was revenge. For a full day, the Bismarck actually gave them the slip. It performed a smart turn, vanished into an Atlantic squall, and the British hunters, in their rage, went the wrong way. The panic in the British Admiralty was unbelievable. They had lost the monster. It was loose again, and now it was wounded and angry. What most people don't realize is how close the Bismarck came to escaping. It was on its way to France. It was almost under the protection of land-based planes. The British battleships were running low on fuel. They had one last chance. The crazy part is, its fate was sealed by a single rickety old biplane. On May 26th, a Catalina flying boat on a long-shot patrol spotted the oil slick. The hunters knew where their prey was, but the British battleships were still too far away. They couldn't catch it in time. The only ship close enough was the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal. But here's the catch. The Ark Royal's planes were ancient. They were Fairey Swordfish biplanes. These planes were covered in fabric. They had two open cockpits, like a First World War plane. Their top speed was a laughable 130 miles per hour. But in this storm, they were lucky to make 100. Their crews called them string bags because they looked so flimsy. This was the weapon the British were sending against the most advanced, high-tech anti-aircraft platform in the world. It was a joke. In a howling 60-mile-per-hour gale, in the last light of day, these tiny, fragile planes went in. The waves were so big, 50 feet high, that the planes were disappearing between them. It was a desperate, almost hopeless attack. The pilots were flying into a wall of flak. They launched their torpedoes. Most missed. Some bounced off the thick armor. But one torpedo, dropped by a plane that got lost and came in from a weird angle, hit the Bismarck in its one weak spot: the stern. The explosion didn't sink the ship. It did something far worse. It jammed the Bismarck's rudders, locking them in a hard-to-port turn. The ship was now stuck. The most advanced battleship in the world, the monster of the Atlantic, was now turning in a giant, helpless circle. The monster was trapped. The British fleet, hearing the news, turned. They were closing in for the final act. The end was near, but the ship's biggest secrets, the ones that would baffle scientists 80 years later, were still to be kept. The ship went down, but its body told an impossible story. A tomb in the dark. The Bismarck was lost on the morning of May 27, 1941, taking over 2,200 men with it. For 48 years, it was gone. A ghost story whispered by sailors. Its exact location was a mystery, buried 3 miles down in the blackest, most hostile place on Earth. Then, in 1989, Dr. Robert Ballard found it. Ballard, the same man who found the Titanic, was obsessed. He knew the British records of the sinking were approximate, and in the deep Atlantic, approximate means lost. He searched a 150-square-mile box of pure empty ocean. You have to get what the pressure is like down there. At that depth, over 15,000 feet, the water exerts a force of over 6,000 pounds per square inch. This isn't like diving in a pool. This is a place so hostile it can squeeze a human into liquid. This is the world Ballard's team was trying to pierce. Their tool was a revolutionary piece of tech called Argo. It was a 12-foot-long steel sled packed with high-resolution cameras and sonar built to survive the crush. For days, they mowed the lawn, towing Argo back and forth, staring at grainy black and white monitors. It was hours of mud, nothing but mud. Then on June 8, 1989, it happened. A shape flickered onto the screen. Debris, a boot, a twisted piece of steel. And then, the hull. What they saw sent a collective gasp through the control room. The Bismarck was upright. This was the first what the fuck moment. The Titanic was a shattered, broken heap. It had been ripped apart. Everyone expected the Bismarck, after such a violent battle and a 3-mile fall, to be a pile of scrap metal. But it wasn't. It was sitting, dignified and menacing, on the slope of an extinct underwater volcano. It looked like it had been placed there. The crazy part was the condition. Its massive 820-foot-long hull was largely in one piece. This was impossible. A 50,000-ton ship falling for over 2 hours through 3 miles of water should have been smashed to pieces on impact, but it wasn't. The cameras showed that the ship had hit the bottom and then slid for over a mile down the volcanic slope, leaving a massive scar in the mud. And yet, it was intact. But something was wrong. The stern, the very back of the ship, was just gone, ripped clean off. This matched the string bag torpedo hit, the fatal wound. Ballard's team then launched Alvin, the 3-person sub, for a closer look. They were the first humans to see the Bismarck since its final, desperate battle. The superstructure, where the command towers, bridges, and anti-aircraft guns were, was shredded. A total chaotic mess. This was where the British shells had hit, turning the topside into a burning ruin. But as they examined the main hull, the story changed. The thickest part, the nearly 13-inch thick steel armor belt designed to stop anything, was almost untouched. They counted only 8 major holes above the waterline. Below it, nothing. No gaping torpedo wounds, no catastrophic breaches. The armored heart of the beast was intact. This discovery didn't provide answers. It created a more profound, disturbing question. How does a ship, pounded for 2 hours by battleships, sink if its main defenses were never broken? The Bismarck was sitting there defiant. What really sent it to the bottom? The mystery only got deeper. In 2002, filmmaker James Cameron, yes, that James Cameron, led a new expedition. He wasn't just going to look at the wreck, he was going inside. He brought a fleet of advanced tech. His primary tools were 2 small, nimble ROVs, remotely operated vehicles nicknamed bots. These were his eyes. They were the size of washing machines attached by a fiber optic cable, and they could fly down the twisted, flooded corridors that no human could ever enter. The mission was a complete forensic analysis, a deep-sea crime scene investigation, and what the bots found was haunting. They glided through flooded hallways, past crew quarters where boots and coats still lay scattered, and into the massive silent engine rooms. It was a journey into a tomb. This wasn't just a ship, it was the final resting place for thousands of men. But the technical data was the real shocker. Cameron's team meticulously measured the shell damage. They confirmed Ballard's findings. The British battleships Rodney and King George V had fired over 700 large-caliber shells. Cameron's team found evidence of only 2 that had fully penetrated the main armor belt. 2. The pride of the German Navy had basically shrugged off the best the Royal Navy could throw at it. The drone footage proved it, but the bots revealed something else. They found long, peeling tears in the hull plating below the armor belt. At first, this looked like the smoking gun, the torpedo damage, but no. The thing is, the damage wasn't from an explosion out. The tears were characteristic of a massive impact. Cameron's team concluded these gashes were caused when the 50,000-ton battleship slammed into the seafloor and slid down the volcano. The mountain had done more damage to the hull than the British torpedoes. The most shocking discovery, though, came from inside. The drones showed that the decks beneath the main armored deck, the crew decks, the mess halls, had been compressed downwards by 10 to 13 feet. This was a clear sign the ship had flooded from the inside out. The sheer weight of the water inside the ship had crushed the internal structure as it plunged into the abyss. This evidence pointed away from external battle damage and towards something the German survivors had been claiming all along. The drones had found the what, but the why was an 80-year-old debate, a captain's final choice. So here's the deal. We are now looking at 2 totally different stories, and for 80 years, this was one of the biggest debates in naval history. Story number 1 is the historical record. The British Royal Navy, in a heroic and desperate hunt, cornered the monster and pounded it into submission. The final battle on the morning of May 27th was a one-sided beatdown. The Bismarck's rudders were jammed. It was a sitting duck. The British ships Rodney and King George V fired over 2,800 shells. Cruisers fired hundreds more. The Dorsetshire fired torpedoes at point-blank range. The Bismarck, burning from end to end, a helpless, crippled wreck, finally gave up and slipped beneath the waves. The British sank the Bismarck. Case closed. It was a victory, pure and simple. Story number 2 is the German survivors' story, and it's the story the drones seem to be telling. The German survivors, the 115 men pulled from the freezing water, were consistent. From the moment they were captured, they all said the same thing. Yes, the ship was a wreck. Yes, the battle was lost. The guns were silent, the engines were dead. But it wasn't sinking. They claimed that with the ship crippled and unable to fight, the captain gave the final order: Selbstversenkung, scuttle the ship. This was a pre-planned procedure. They testified that engineers went below decks, into the flooded and dark engine rooms, and opened the internal watertight doors and seacocks, massive valves that let the ocean pour in. They also claimed they planted demolition charges with 9-minute fuses in the most vital areas to ensure the ship would go down fast. Why? It's simple. Pride. They were determined that their ship, the most advanced ship in the world, would not be captured. They would not let it be towed to a British port and put on display as a war prize. They would give their ship to the ocean themselves. For decades, the British and most historians dismissed this. They called it a prideful excuse, a way for the survivors to claim they were never beaten. The official winner of the battle was the Royal Navy. But then Ballard and Cameron's drones changed everything. You see the intact outer armor belt? That directly supports the scuttling theory. If the ship was never breached in a fatal way from the outside, it must have been flooded from the inside, the internal collapse of the decks. The ones crushed down by 10 feet? That is the smoking gun. It is exactly what you would expect to see if the ship was systematically flooded from the bottom up. It filled like a bathtub, and the immense, crushing weight of the water inside it caused it to founder and finally, go down. The British bombardment was horrific. It turned the ship into a non-functional burning slaughterhouse. It made the ship's end inevitable. They destroyed its ability to fight, to move, to communicate. They removed the Bismarck as a threat. But the final act, the one that sent it on its 3-mile, 2-hour-long plunge to the sea floor, that seems to have been an inside job. So is the legend really true? For decades, this was a fierce debate. But the chilling evidence from the dark abyss reveals a far more complex truth. The thing is, everyone's right. The Bismarck's fate was a brutal 2-act tragedy. Act 1 belonged to the British. Their relentless pursuit and that 1-in-a-million torpedo hit from a string-bag biplane crippled the ship. That was the real turning point. That was the moment the Bismarck was doomed. Act 2 belonged to the Germans. With their ship dead and thousands of shells raining down, they made their final desperate choice. They hastened the end. They chose their own fate. This has been the accepted answer for over 20 years. A complex, shared history. It's the story that finally made sense of the drone footage and the survivor reports. It solved the mystery until last month. Because the scuttling theory, the battle damage, none of it explains the signal. A scuttled ship is just as dead as a sunk one. A ship that's been flooded with salt water for 80 years has no power. The old mystery was solved, but the new one is far stranger. The old mystery is solved. The new one is far weirder. A call from the deep. So we're back to the pulse. The beep, boop, bzzt, from 3 miles down. The old mystery is solved. The British and the Germans sank the Bismarck. But this new mystery, this is a WTF moment for science, history, and frankly, everyone. Why is a ship lost for over 80 years suddenly active? Let's look at the theories. And this is where it gets wild. Theory 1, the seafloor battery. This is the science one. What most people don't realize is that the Bismarck is resting on the slope of an underwater volcano. It's extinct, but that means the seafloor there is full of strange minerals and, just maybe, geothermal energy. A tiny bit of heat. The theory goes like this. The Bismarck was full of experimental tech. What if it had an automated distress beacon? A pinger. Something designed to automatically send a signal if the ship went down. But what about the power? 80 years? Get this, the beacon's battery would be long dead. But what if the wreck, by sheer 1 in a billion chance, settled in a way that 2 different types of metal from the hull, say the steel hull and a bronze propeller, are touching a mineral-rich geothermal vent? The ocean is full of salt water, which is a great electrolyte. You could, in theory, create a giant, weak, natural battery. It's called galvanic corrosion, but on a massive scale. The volcano provides a tiny bit of heat and minerals, the salt water connects everything, and the massive wreck itself becomes the anode and cathode. It's like a giant weird potato battery. This battery could be creating just enough voltage, just microvolts of power, to kickstart a long-dead, low-power transmitter. It's an insane long shot, but it is technically possible. It would be the strangest battery in the world, but it doesn't really explain why the signal is a pattern. A natural battery would be random, a fizzle. This is ordered. Theory 2, the wonder weapon cargo. This is the conspiracy one. Everyone's obsessed with the Bismarck's guns and armor. But what about the cargo? This ship was the pride of the Third Reich. It was a symbol of their technological power. In 1941, they were experimenting with all kinds of Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons. What if the Bismarck was secretly transporting one of these? A prototype, maybe an early atomic device, maybe a new kind of torpedo guidance system, or maybe something else. There are stories about a wonder weapon called Die Glock, or the Bell, a supposed anti-gravity device. Most people think it's a myth. But what if the Bismarck was the escort for a top-secret U-boat carrying this, and the U-boat in the chaos was lost with it? Or what if the ship itself was testing a new power source, a prototype nuclear battery, something that could power a ship for years? What if that battery is still down there, leaking just enough power to make a piece of radio equipment sing? This theory says the wreck isn't sending a signal. The cargo is. The wreck is just the box. The signal's pattern, beep, boop, best, could be a countdown or a hello, or a status report. The pressure and cold of the abyss has preserved this thing and its internal power source, and it has finally woken up. Theory 3, the ghost in the machine. This is the supernatural one. Think about this. The Bismarck's final battle was a nightmare. 2 hours of constant thundering explosions, over 2,000 men trapped in a burning dark steel box. The terror, the bravery, the end. What if that energy went somewhere? There's a theory called the stone tape theory. It says that intense emotional events can be imprinted onto a physical location, like a recording. The building, or in this case, the wreck, holds that memory. What if the Bismarck wreck is a giant 3-mile deep haunted house? The signal, the beep, boop, bzzt. What if it's not a radio broadcast? What if it's an echo? What if it's the sound of the German engineers setting the demolition charges? The click, boom, click of the 9-minute fuses. The ship isn't active, it's remembering. And the Odyssey's new super-sensitive hydrophones are the first thing ever to be able to hear this echo. It's not a signal from the ship, it's the sound of the ship's last defiant act, playing on a loop for 80 years. Theory 4. The abyss stares back. This is the Lovecraft one. The deep abyss is the last true unknown on Earth. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the bottom of our own ocean. It is a world of crushing pressure, total darkness, and life, but not as we know it. The Bismarck wreck is one of the largest unnatural objects down there. A massive mountain of refined metals, steel, copper, brass. For 80 years, it's been leaching these metals into the surrounding water, creating a unique chemical and magnetic signature. What if this signature has attracted something? What if the signal, the pulse, isn't the Bismarck? What if it's the sound of something else, something unknown, something biological, or not, that has made the Bismarck's hull its home, or its food? We've all seen bioluminescence, creatures that glow. What if there are creatures that broadcast, that use radio waves or sonar pings to hunt or communicate in the black? The Odyssey research ship only knows the location of the signal. They assume it's the ship. But what if the ship is just the bait, and the signal is the sound of the thing that took it? So what do you think is really down there? A natural battery, a lost weapon, a ghost, or a modern secret? Let us know your theory in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.